It is the largest privately held company in America, a food empire that quietly feeds a planet of 8 billion people, moving over $160 billion in revenue a year. And it answers to no shareholder, no stock ticker, and no one alive but the family that built it in the dark. Before we step inside that empire, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand how the hidden machines of money and power actually work, subscribe to this channel. It's where we take apart the empires and dynasties that quietly run the world, one documentary at a time. It is the year 1865. The American Civil War has just ended. The nation is bleeding, rebuilding, and starving all at once, and out west, the railroads are pushing iron rails into empty grassland that has never seen a town. In a speck of a place called Conover, Iowa, a settlement most maps will never bother to name, a young man steps off beside the tracks and buys a single grain warehouse. His name is William Wallace Cargill. He has no fortune. He has no plan to grow the wheat and no plan to bake the bread. He has something stranger. An idea. Ask yourself one thing. How does a company you have never voted for, never bought stock in, and were never meant to notice, end up feeding you? The answer begins here, with one wooden building beside a set of railroad tracks, and a man who understood something almost no one else did. Look closely at what William Wallace Cargill actually does. The farmer grows the wheat. The miller grinds the flour. The baker makes the bread. Cargill does none of it. He simply sits at the one exact point where the farmer's grain meets the railroad car, and he takes a small cut of everything that flows through. A little on the way in, a little on the way out. The harvest of an entire region has to pass through his hands to reach the rest of the world, and every bushel leaves a few coins behind. And here is the first secret this company understands before almost anyone else on earth. Real power is not in owning the land. It is not in owning the crop, or the mill, or the factory. It is in controlling the flow between them. Think of it like a toll booth on the only road out of the harvest. You do not need to plant a single seed. You do not need to own a single field. You only need to own the road, the narrow point every wagon, every rail car, every ton of grain is forced to cross. And whoever owns the toll booths owns the trade itself, quietly, invisibly, without ever getting dirt under his fingernails. That single idea, control the flow, not the asset, is not luck. It is not a Midwestern accident. It is one of the oldest patterns behind almost every great fortune ever built, and the people at the very top have always known it. Which brings me to something worth putting in front of you before we go any further. If you have ever watched an empire like this from the outside and wondered how they actually did it, there is a book called The Empire Code that breaks down the 6 recurring patterns beneath nearly every great fortune: leverage, positioning, capital, and this exact secret Cargill just stumbled onto, controlling the flow instead of owning the thing. It lays each pattern out plainly, so you can stop admiring these giants from the outside and start seeing the machinery underneath, and spot the same code at work in any story like this one. Scan the code on screen or find the link in the description. Because once you can see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And William Wallace Cargill is about to run it across an entire continent. As new rail lines spread west, Cargill follows them. Where the tracks go, he goes. At every junction, every crossing, every dusty new town where a locomotive stops to take on grain, he plants another elevator, a tall wooden tower beside the tracks, waiting to swallow the harvest. 1 becomes 10. 10 become dozens. He is not buying farms. He is buying the choke points between them. So what does William Wallace Cargill actually own? Not the wheat, not the bread. Something far more valuable. The space in between. The arteries. The flow. By stringing his grain elevators along the railroads like beads on a wire, he comes to control not the fields of the Midwest, but the only paths their harvest can travel. The farmers own the land. Cargill owns the way out. By the early 1900s, from the outside, the machine looks unstoppable. Grain elevators dot the rail junctions of the American heartland. The flow runs through Cargill hands from 100 small towns to the ports of the world, and the small cuts have grown into a quiet fortune. The empire built on the space in between looks invincible. But inside, something is wrong. Beneath the wooden towers and the endless flow of grain, a secret is quietly rotting the foundation. And in 1909, William Wallace Cargill dies, and the empire he built on the flow is drowning in debt so vast it could erase everything overnight. The man who will save it is not even a Cargill. He is an outsider who has married into the blood. His name is John Macmillan, the son-in-law who married into the Cargill blood, and in 1909 he inherits not a fortune, but a landmine. The books are a maze of secret loans. Every grain elevator, every rail contract, every dollar of the empire William Wallace built on the flow is pledged against debt so vast that a single nervous banker could bring the whole thing down before breakfast. Macmillan does not panic. He counts. He sits at a desk stacked with ledgers and reads the machine the way its founder once read the railroads, and what he sees is not ruin, but a structure worth saving. One by one, he renegotiates the loans. He calms the banks. He sells what bleeds and keeps what earns. And slowly, quietly, he wrestles the hidden debt to the ground. By the time he is finished, something permanent has happened. Two families have become one. The Cargills and the Macmillans fuse into a single bloodline of power. The Cargill-Macmillans, bound not by ambition alone, but by marriage, by blood, by a shared and unspoken vow. They will run this machine for over a century, and they will never, not once, sell it to the public. The people who study this firm still marvel at what he pulled off. He didn't own the name. He'd married into it. But when the founder's own sons froze, it was the outsider who kept his nerve, who looked at a mountain of debt and saw a machine still worth running. That refusal to flinch, that's what he handed down. To understand how they win, you have to understand the one trick that sits at the dark heart of it all. Hedging. Picture a trader who has bought 1,000 tons of wheat that won't reach the market for months. If the price falls before he sells, he is ruined. So he makes a second bet, a promise to sell that wheat at today's price, no matter what the market does later. If prices crash, the promise pays. If prices soar, he simply earns it on the grain itself. Either way, the margin survives. Hedging is nothing more than buying insurance on the price of grain itself. So how does a grain trader win whether prices soar or crash? It buys insurance on the price itself. And the house never loses its cut. And here is the terrifying beauty of the thing. The same trick that protects a single bushel of wheat scales to everything. Corn, soybeans, salt, beef, rail cars stamped with every raw ingredient the modern world eats, each one hedged, each one insured, each one flowing through Cargill's hands at a small, certain profit. And eventually, the trick outgrows food altogether until Cargill is moving pure financial risk, the price of weather, of currency, of freight, across every continent on Earth. The farmer carries the danger. Cargill keeps the flow. But the greatest weapon in the arsenal is not the hedge. It is the silence. Every rival on Earth would kill to know one number. How big is Cargill really? And that is the one number the family will never let anyone see. Because the Cargill Macmillans make a decision that defines them forever. They will stay private. No shareholders. No quarterly earnings call. No stock ticker. While every other giant of American business marches onto the stock exchange, rings the bell, and opens its books to the glare, Cargill does the exact opposite. It steps into the shadow and pulls the door shut behind it. Where its rivals must publish, Cargill says nothing. There is no press podium. There is no ticker crawling its value across a screen. The empire simply vanishes from view and keeps on growing. And who makes the decisions inside this global colossus? Not a faceless board answering to Wall Street. A family. A private council in a wood-paneled room, seated by blood, running a company that feeds hundreds of millions the way another family might run a farm or a corner store. Deals worth billions of dollars are struck in conversations no outsider will ever hear. There is no leak because there is no shareholder to leak to. And this is the strange law of Cargill's power. Every crisis that should have exposed it, every scandal that should have cracked it open, finds nothing to hold on to. There is no share price to collapse, no board to revolt, no annual report to betray the truth. The storm passes over the empire, and the empire only grows quieter and larger and harder to see. For 100 years, the same bloodline sits at the top. Fathers pass the empire to sons and sons-in-law, never to strangers, never to the market. And with every passing decade, the machine feeds more of the world and shows less of itself. By the 1970s, this quiet Midwestern trader has become something no one planned for, and no one can quite measure. Governments, not companies, governments, come to depend on Cargill to feed their own people. When a nation's harvest fails, when its citizens grow hungry, it is not another state it turns to. It is a private firm in Minnesota that answers to no one but its own family. And then, in the depths of the Cold War, a phone rings. On the line is the last caller anyone on Earth would expect. The Soviet Union, the sworn enemy of the West. Starving, desperate, and about to ask a private American company for help. And Cargill is about to quietly feed the very superpower its own government is racing to defeat, while the world barely learns its name. The deal is done in near silence. It is the 1970s, and the great grain deals with the Soviet Union are unfolding in the depths of the Cold War. The wheat harvest inside the Soviet Union has failed. Moscow needs to feed a starving population, and it needs to do it fast, and it needs to do it without the West understanding just how weak it truly is. So the Kremlin does not call the White House, it calls the traders. And one of the largest of them, a quiet family firm out of Minnesota, begins loading American grain onto cargo ships bound for Soviet ports, tens of millions of tons of it, moving between two superpowers locked in a war for the future of the world. Think about what that means. The government of the United States is spending billions to defeat the Soviet Union. And at the very same moment, a private American company is keeping that same enemy alive, one shipload of wheat at a time. Washington barely knows the full shape of the deal until the grain is already gone and the prices at home have started to climb. They call it the Great Grain Robbery. But it is not a robbery. It is simply what happens when the flow between farm and market runs through a machine no one in power can actually see. Because this is the moment the empire stops being a business. A company that can feed your enemy without asking you is no longer a company. It is a force of nature that governments must negotiate with. And here, at last, the oldest secret pays off in full. The secret William Wallace Cargill stumbled into beside a single grain warehouse in Conover 100 years before. Cargill never went public. No shareholders, no stock ticker, no quarterly earnings call, no annual moment where the beast is forced to strip naked in front of Wall Street and show the world exactly how big it has grown. And that changes everything. A public company can be read. Its filings are open. Its owners can be counted. Its board can be pressured. Its every move eventually surfaces in a document someone can subpoena. But Cargill answers to no one but the Cargill-Macmillan family. There is no filing. There is no ticker to watch. So what do you do about a company you cannot see, cannot audit, and cannot vote against? The answer is nothing. And that is exactly the point. Invisibility is not a side effect of staying private. Invisibility is the entire weapon. And a weapon like that does not go unchallenged forever. As the empire grows, the accusations begin to arrive. Labor abuses in its supply chains, stretching across continents and into places the cameras rarely reach. Charges that its appetite for soy and cattle feeds the burning and the clearing. That deforestation in the Amazon follows the demand its trading desks help create. Market power so vast that in certain crops, in certain years, this single-family firm moves more of a nation's harvest than the nation's own government ever could. Each accusation lands like a blow that should stagger a public corporation. Fines, headlines, boycotts, congressional attention. And each time, the empire simply absorbs it and keeps moving. Because there is no stock price to collapse, no shareholders to flee, no quarterly panic. The crisis that would break a visible company only proves, again, how far beyond ordinary accountability this one truly sits. The scandal that should be the ending becomes just another chapter. Every wound that lands on the beast only reveals how little of it you were ever allowed to touch. Now bring it into the present. Today, Cargill moves well over $160 billion in revenue a year. It remains the largest privately held company in America, bigger than names you know by heart, names that trade every day on the open market, names that answer to millions of strangers. Cargill answers to none of them. It moves grain, meat, salt, and pure financial risk across every continent on Earth. Its ships are in every ocean, its elevators beside tracks in countries most of us will never visit. When you eat, somewhere in the invisible chain between the field and your plate, there is a reasonable chance the flow passed through its hands. And you were never meant to know. So understand what really happened here. Staying out of the spotlight was never weakness. It was never shyness, never modesty, never a family too old-fashioned to cash out. It was the whole strategy, from the very beginning. The empires that chase the light get owned by the crowd. The empire that hides in the dark gets to keep itself, whole and untouchable, for over 150 years. Every empire that let the public in eventually lost control of itself. What happens to the one empire that never did? You are looking at the answer. This is the lesson written into every grain elevator Cargill ever built beside those railroad tracks. Real power was never in owning the land. It was never in the farm, or the factory, or the bread on the shelf. It was in controlling the flow, the arteries between them, quietly, where no shareholder could ever demand a seat at the table. The empires you can see are auctioned off to strangers, broken up, absorbed, forgotten. But the ones built in the dark, on the flow itself, belong forever to the few who never wanted you to look. It begins with a single warehouse in Conover, Iowa, beside a set of tracks pushing west into empty grass. One man taking a small cut of everything that flows past. And it ends here, with an invisible hand resting quietly on the food supply of the entire planet, feeding billions, answering to no one, seen by almost no one, and richer than nearly anything you could name. The seed that grew in the dark. Cargill. Phineas.